we look at our schools, and God is an absolute gentleman. We're saying that prayer's not allowed in schools anymore, and God stands back. And so we have, instead of prayers, we have drugs and guns, knives. And what we need to do is we need to get back to the days where Christ is king, where our lives, where our nation is focused on God. And in preparation for today, what I was doing was I was thinking about what would it be like if Christ came into Edinburgh? What would it be like for him as a man? And I was just thinking of the Sermon on the Mount. And here are 5,000 men. 5,000 men. You've also got women and children. So you're talking about a person who stood there without a microphone and spoke to close on, 15, 20,000 people? And he was heard. He was heard. He must have been a very, very strong man. He was a carpenter by trade. So what he would do is he wouldn't go to B&Q and buy a plank and make a table. He would literally have to go and chop down the tree and then from there make the planks. So he was used to physical labor. He was a strong man. Today what I'd like to do is just give some of the facts of the crucifixion. Far too often we look at the cross and we see this lovely sort of unmarred body hanging on the cross. That's a lie. That's a lie. Let's just go through the events. The night before, they were in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he was praying with his disciples. Now don't forget, just a week before that, sort of 4 or 5 days before that, he had come into Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. And everyone had praised him. In fact, they'd worshipped him. He rode in on a donkey. Okay? And they lay down palms. And here he was, sweating blood in anguish for what was going to happen. And the disciples fell asleep. And he comes out and he says to them, guys, stay awake with me. Right? And then Judas comes in and betrays him with a kiss. So this all happened in the middle of the night. Now with very little sleep, or no sleep, in Jesus' case, he's taken before the high priests. And by this time, it's not a case of the soldiers would say, oh, Jesus, come with us. Okay, they would have chained him, bound him, pushed him, kicked him, punched him. So he gets there. They spit on him, they blindfold him, they mock him, they hit him. And it's at 6 o'clock in the morning that he's before Pilate. So battered, bruised, dehydrated, exhausted, he gets brought before Pilate and then gets taken to Herod. Herod looks at him and says, well, I have no judgment against you, and sends him back to Pilate. And please, it's not a case of a school outing, where you've got a line of kids. These guys are pushing him and punching him. So he's suffering abuse all this time. And it's there at Pilate that Pilate decides, well, fine, what they're going to do is they're actually going to they're going to flog him. Now, there's a bit of disagreement among the authorities because it was an unusual thing for someone to be flogged and then crucified. And many believe that Pilate actually thought that, let's flog him and that would be the end of it. But with the crowd chanting, there was a case of, so let's release someone. And the crowd said, release Barabbas. The flogging that Jesus went through was a harrowing experience. He would have been chained, arms bound against a post, stripped. And the Roman soldier whose duty it was to flog would have run up and whipped his back. I don't know if you've been hit with the stick. It's painful. But when you get hit with the whip, it's a little bit worse. This had knots in it and pieces of bone tied in it. So the soldier would run up and flog him. And as the whip retracted, it would take off chunks of meat and rip his skin. And it wasn't just his back. Those things would come round and they would rip him in the face. Okay? Some accounts say that he was unrecognizable. So in this state, they now weave thorns and put that on his head. Throw a cloak over him, put a stick in his hand, and mock him, slap him. When they took that cloak off him, that would have been the same as ripping plaster, some sort of wound, taking the covering off that wound, but that would have been over his entire back. So that in itself would have been absolute agony. And I'm sure, they just took the stick out of his hand. I'm guaranteed that somebody walloped the crown of thorns on his head, just to inflict more pain and suffering. He was in absolute agony. Then what they did was they took the crossbar and this piece of wood would have weighed 60 kilograms, so that's 110 pounds. Right? Not nice, neatly sanded. It would have had splinters, knots in it. And that's what he was tied. His arms were tied up. Right? So now he's got this thing on his back. And without the beating, you would struggle to carry that. So now he's walking up to Golgotha, being pushed and shoved, and the crowd jeering and mocking him. Right? And he would fall. And when he would fall, it would be face down, chest face down, flat on the ground. I mean, his muscles must have been in excruciating pain. And I don't know how many times he falls, but at some stage the Roman guards have enough And they cut him loose, and they get Simon of Cyrene to carry his cross. That landing on the floor with this big weight on your back, the equivalent of that today would be being in a car accident and the steering wheel hitting you in the chest. You had no seatbelt. Okay? And it would cause a myocardial injury. Okay? It would cause damage to your heart. So at 9 o'clock, what they do is they sent him up to be crucified. And I mean, you can imagine this. He gets to the top there, and they take the bar off, the crossbar from Simon. Patibulum is the word that they use for it. And they lie it down, and then they put him down. And I'm sure they don't just say, Jesus, would you just lie down here? I'm sure they shoved him down. And then they shoved a nail through his wrist. Now, I don't know if you've ever had a splinter, a steel splinter. It's painful. Or stuck yourself with a needle, ladies, when you sew. Right. This is the nail right through his wrist. The Roman soldier would go to the other side and make sure his arms weren't too tight. Okay? They would have to be loose, because the whole point of crucifixion was the death on the cross was a case of suffocation. Because you can't breathe when you're hanging from your arms. Right? So what you've got to do is you've got to give enough leeway in your legs to push up so that you can breathe. And that's the death of crucifixion. You hang there until you are too weak to breathe. And it's a case of this constant agony, seesaw, up and down to get breath. That was the death on the cross. And guys would take 3-4 days to die on the cross. That was the idea behind coming up and breaking the guy's legs, because then they couldn't breathe and they would just suffocate and die. Romans perfected crucifixion was the Roman death. Okay? They perfected the art of cruel suffering for someone to die. It's a slow, agonizing death. And yet at the 6th hour, he was dead. Sorry, 9th hour, he was dead. The 6th hour, darkness came over the land. So the 9th hour is about 3 o'clock. So it was about midday, 12, 1 o'clock. Darkness came over the land. There was an eclipse. One of the scriptures describes the scene as the sun went dark and red the moon. In Mark 15, verse 33, it says that the 6th hour darkness came over the whole land until the 9th hour. Matthew 26, verse 46. Sorry, 27, verse 46. It says that about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me? In John 19, verse 30, he says, it is finished. In Luke 23, verse 46, he says, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. In Matthew 27, verse 50, it says, Jesus cried out again in a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. My understanding previously, and I was just quoting this to Ratu last night, that Jesus never ever died as a result of the crucifixion. I incorrectly understood that blood mixed with water that is described in John's Gospel is evidence of an emotional death. I stand corrected. Blood and water is evidence of a ruptured heart. Death from blunt force trauma. Blunt force trauma is basically pounding on your chest. Okay? Car steering wheel in an accident, just one blow like that could cause blunt force trauma and you could be dead within 24 hours. It normally takes about 24 hours. However, with the added stress of the crucifixion, 6-7 hours is a likely death. So Matthew 27 verse 50 gives an account that today would suffice as an autopsy report. And it says that Jesus cried out in a loud voice and suddenly died. So he died of a ruptured heart. The events that followed Jesus' death Matthew chapter 27 51 and 52, it describes how the curtain to the Holy of Holies was torn in two. Now the Holy of Holies was a place that the high priest would go in once a year. He'd go in there once a year. And the significance of that is we can now enter into God's holiness. There was an earthquake, tombs broke open, and the bodies of many holy people were raised to life. Three Gospels account for the centurion's comment. Matthew 27:54, Mark 15 verse 38, and Luke 23 verse 47. Centurion said, "Surely this was the Son of God." The soldiers broke the bones of the thieves on his left and his right because no one could be left hanging on the cross for the Passover. It was at that stage that they noticed that Jesus wasn't breathing, and they pierced his side, and out came the blood and water. And that's in John's Gospel, chapter 19, verse 34. Jesus died a harrowing death. His experience, the punishment that he went through, was something that I cannot even imagine. I cannot even imagine. And it's with that death that he saved us. It's with that death we can have eternal life. It's with that death. Isaiah describes it as a lamb going to slaughter. And he was the sacrifice for our sin, for our wrongdoing. He repaired the relationship that was broken in the Garden of Eden.